Okay, welcome everybody. So this presentation is called Rejecting Diet Culture, Promoting Body Neutrality and Health at Every Size. Just to introduce myself, I am a social worker with Youth Mental Health and Addiction Services, and I work with a specific focus on providing treatment to youth and families experiencing difficulty with body image and disordered eating through family therapy, individual therapy, and groups. In my work as a clinical social worker, I provide this support to youth ages 12 to 18, and I'm passionate about working with young people to improve their relationship with food and body. I recognize that each person's experience with food and body is unique and that personal experience is impacted by a number of factors within their intersectional identity, which we will talk a bit more about. But really, I want to say that I know that individual narratives are multi-layered and that based on that, social constructions and the things that we experience in everyday life, we have different impact based on that. So, for example, a person of color may experience more discrimination if they're in a larger body than, and because of the intersection of oppression than a white person in a larger body. Not to say that they don't face some stigma as a white person, but just to say that it's a layered oppression. So for myself, my social location is that I'm an educated, middle-class, cisgender, heterosexual, thin, white woman, and so by virtue of those things, I'm also able-bodied. So by virtue of those things, I have privilege, but my journey with body is not any less valid because as a woman, I still experience some oppression by virtue of my female identity. So just to think about kind of your social location, the social location of your clients, and to think about how those intersections may impact them, especially if they're experiencing difficulties with food and body, how that's another layered piece of discrimination or oppression or stigma that they may face. And that's really why this is a social work issue, a human rights issue, is that people do face stigma based on their body shape and size, as well as color and those other intersections of self. I also wanted to tell you a bit quickly about Nourish YXC, which is a committee that I work with of volunteers that works to create safe, inclusive, transformative, body-neutral events for people of all sizes, shapes, genders, abilities, and backgrounds. We host things like small-scale free events, such as speaker series and book clubs, but we also have our larger conference that occurs annually. And so if you're interested in that kind of thing, check out Nourish YXC as well as a great resource with a lot of free events. My goal for this presentation is to provide information on this topic today for mental health workers and addictions workers to gain insight into their relationship with food and body and to develop an understanding of how the care we provide can help or hinder our clients' relationships with food and body. So just a bit of an outline. So today we're going to talk about first how body image attitudes develop, and then we will talk about body policing, what that is, what that looks like. Then we'll roll that into body policing and diet culture and the impacts. And then we will shift into how we provide body neutral health care, and specifically within mental health settings. So first, I like to share the body image attitudes continuum that I use in most of my presentations. This is just to demonstrate that our relationship with our body and the attitudes that we have towards our body exists on a continuum. So on the one far end, you'll see that there is self-hatred and body loathing. On the other side, you'll see body positivity. And this is to say that this isn't that our relationship with body image isn't a constant state. It's fluid and it often vacillates between these. Just when we think we may have some body acceptance in our life where we're feeling okay with what our body looks like, we may have a day or a moment where we don't like our body at all. And then that's just to say that this is entirely normal. Right now, there's a whole kind of trend about body positivity, which is really positive in terms of showing different types of bodies and promoting acceptance of all bodies. However, body positivity isn't a permanent state, so when people try to get there, sometimes it can feel like it's too daunting, it's too perfect. Even those people who promote body positivity and say that they're body positive aren't feeling body positive all the time. So just a note on that. The halfway point between love and hate is a rarely visited destination, which we call body neutrality. This isn't to be confused with body positivity or body acceptance, but it's a strategy to decrease self-hate and negative self-talk. Body neutrality acknowledges what is rather than longing for what isn't. And it's a place to start when body positivity feels too far out of reach. So this can be a very good place for yourself or for your clients. It's about focusing on what your body can do. It's not about thinking about what you'd rather fix about yourself. It's about what it is. And often people say, body neutrality is about not really thinking about body at all. This is not to say you don't nurture your body or think about how your body moves, but it's just shifting the focus so you're not focusing so much on body and focusing on other things that matter. So let's talk about where it all begins when we talk about how body image attitudes are created. There's a few things that come to mind. So cultural socialization, interpersonal experiences, physical characteristics and changes, personality traits, and then intersections and oppressions, which I mentioned earlier. So when we talk about how body image attitudes are influenced and formed, by the time we're preschool age, we have begun to learn about society's view of physical characteristics and what attitudes or attributes are ideal. We learn which body types are acceptable and what's considered healthy or unhealthy. There's a lot of dichotomy in our society around those things. We learn about what we should live up to in terms of those expectations for what we're based on our sexual organs. We're told, this is our sex organs. We're told that you have a penis, so therefore you are a male, and this is what males should look like, which we know is not true, but that's often what the images or the attitudes that we are taught. There's also a lot of things around specifically with media and the thin ideal that are pervasive. With male bodies, it's often deemed, you need to be masculine, you need to be muscular. Women are told that they need to be thin and tiny. Historically, we've come to understand that women's experience are greater, and the same thing goes with girls. We've also learned recently in the literature that these things do also affect men and boys, and especially is difficult for those who are non-binary and transgender. I just talked a little bit about that, how you're kind of prescribed what you're supposed to be by virtue of your sex organs, and so that can be a very big conflict for people. Lived experiences, of course, influence our relationship with body image. So that includes things like our interactions with peers, like teasing and bullying, our interactions with family and how our family members talk about bodies. Maybe they're taunting or teasing, or maybe they just make appearance-based comments. And those things can have lasting effects into adulthood. So, and sometimes it's even things that we don't even think about, like a parent mentioning something about their body that they don't like, and a child overhearing it and thinking that, oh, this is not okay, and I can't ever have that. So a lot of those things are ingrained at a very early age. We also know that lots of changes happen with our body image and how we feel about our bodies during puberty. There's these dramatic changes, and so they bring up this new preoccupation with our physical appearance. And changes that occur in shape and size, as well as skin and hair, body hair, can have us to have this where we need to focus on having the right body, the right clothing, the right hairstyle. There's a lot of pressure as young people to live up to those things. And we know that different personalities have different temperaments, and that some people are more sensitive to comments than others. And so some people may hear comments about body and not really think much about it, but others take that to heart and become really this becomes a dictation of what they need to do in terms of their body, what they feel. Some of us can let things go, and some of us feel an immense pressure and anxiety about body, and this perfectionism kind of comes in. So these, of course, are compounded by layers of identities and oppressions that people face, which is what we've already talked about a bit. And this is all to say that you weren't born with your body image difficulties, they were constructed over time. And so for yourself to think about how did this emerge for you, when you're working with clients, to have them think about how did it emerge for them, right? And so to know that it's been constructed, and then that therefore it means it can change. It doesn't have to stay at that self-loathing end of things. So body policing occurs when we enforce societal norms and expectations or laws on ourselves and on others regarding what types of bodies are acceptable. So these can be subtle or overt. Some examples in healthcare are places that are not wheelchair accessible, and this isn't even just in healthcare, it's in general. What does it tell people about them if they are in a wheelchair in a body and they can't access a space? It tells them that they're not wanted, perhaps, that they're not welcome in that space. And these are things that able-bodied people don't have to consider, right? It happens in our daily culture in a variety of ways. We're policed about how we should look in our bodies, our shape, size, weight, our gender expression, right? How we should look as women or men, or what if we don't fall into those categories? What if we don't identify that way? Our abilities, which I touched on, our skin color. There's other things as well. We know that this is perpetuated throughout the health and fitness industry. Sometimes it's phys ed teachers, personal trainers, physicians, right, telling people to go on diets when the evidence doesn't support that that's actually what's helpful. Doing things like measuring BMIs in phys ed class, and just the overt media and advertising that tells us, you can wear this item of clothing if you look like this, and otherwise don't even try. We're told a lot about what's considered to be healthy and beautiful. And this body policing stuff has occurred throughout history. If you think about things like colonialism and reservations, and slavery and the Holocaust, all of those things dictated ways of being it is acceptable to have a body and put sanctions on people who did not fall into certain categories. So for Indigenous people in this country, they were taught that they needed to be more like white people and that their culture was not acceptable. That is a form of body policing. And so it is learned, it is promoted, and it is ingrained in our society. So what body policing looks like, it's telling people what's acceptable to do with their bodies and removing autonomy and personal choice. Another example of body policing that's occurred in healthcare, forced sterilization of people because of their color or Indigenous people. In Canada, there's been a history of forced sterilization for people with intellectual and physical disabilities as well as Indigenous women. And so that's telling them again, like, you shouldn't reproduce because of that. Some schools police what children are able to do in terms of what they're eating at school. And so all these things are things to be mindful of because they may be impacting our clients. And our role is to support parents in advocating so that these practices can stop. And these little memes here are just an example of that, right? Saying certain people are allowed to wear leggings and some people aren't. Certain people are allowed to wear crop tops and some people aren't. So those are just some of those things that when we talk about overt and more subtle practices around body policing. So when we talk about healthism, this is a concept that was coined by Crawford, and really healthism is kind of another form of discrimination. When we think about racism or sexism, healthism is creating this shame or blame or guilt around, if you don't fit into this health idea. So the World Health Organization has this idea of complete health, and that is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And I ask people, is there anyone who has complete health? I have never yet met someone who fits into those kind of criteria or boxes. this kind of idea of health, and we're being taught that we need to perform health. So we need to eat right, we need to go to the gym, we need to look a certain way. Health is an act that is performed. Healthism is a stigma that occurs, and it can cause people to have a lot of problems, like not accessing health care because they feel like they they need to lose weight in order to get help for this particular thing, which some doctors do say. And so it creates a lot of fear-mongering, moralizing of food and body and certain body types, which is right and wrong, and those sorts of things. I really like this quote from the Journal of Obesity. This isn't the complete quote, but it is unethical to continue to prescribe weight loss. Was in the Journal of Obesity in 2014, and that is because we know that people are being prescribed weight loss when we know that this is actually not helpful. 98% of diets fail. We know that that weight loss and weight cycling actually causes more problems than good in terms of inflammation and other problems that can come from ongoing weight cycling, right dieting, chronic dieting, and those sorts of things. And that some people are just not meant to be in smaller bodies, and that's the thing that we don't consider. And we also need to consider that just because someone has a thin body does not mean they're healthy. People assume those things, but there can be a lot going on for them hormonally and other issues with bones, etc. If they're in smaller bodies. And so schools and healthcare systems can oppose these views about food and body, morality, and so instead of imposing them, we can oppose them. Like I talked about schools enforcing rules around lunches. Instead of doing that, we can have an influence around how do we develop healthy relationships with food and exercise. Making comments about food and body teaches children and youth that they cannot trust their internal cues, and that's something that we are taught very early, right, in terms of not being able to trust ourselves with the types of food we're eating or the choices we're making, and we're inherently designed to have internal cues that teach us what we need to eat, and we're just supposed to listen to them, but we're taught not to by society, and we develop a distrust with ourselves. Talking about being overweight or obese reinforces fat phobia and stigmatization. So instead, I like this other idea about health, which is Sudbury District Health came out with this kind of idea about health is a rewarding job with a living wage. Obviously, this would be applied to adults, but these other things, so you could have a parent who's providing you with a food on the table, a place to call home, having options and opportunities, a good start in life, and community belonging. And we know that all of those things actually contribute to overall health and longevity. So it is our job to help our clients find those things and not to impose those other ideas, those healthism-based ideas. This is an interesting pyramid that I like to share, created by a social worker, the Food for Thought pyramid. And I just think it's really interesting because people feel inclined to share their nutrition and health advice and ask advice from people who are unqualified about food and nutrition. And so it becomes problematic because we're getting told to eat certain diets that people don't necessarily have a foundation for. And when parents do this, this can lead into children and youth having kind of messed up relationships with food and exercise. So instead, I like this because it talks about, at the bottom, what actually contributes to a healthy well-being, social economic factors, right? So country, race, gender, all those intersectionalities that we talked about. Genetics and luck also have a large portion of what contributes to our health and overall well-being. Then we have relationships and social supports, purpose and meaning, emotional resilience, humor and play, and then at the very top it's exercise and nutrition advice. And I love it says use sparingly, instead rely on internal cues. So, that's something that you can hand out to parents or think about, right, is that what really matters in terms of our health, how to really enhance our health and well-being. So the impacts of body policing and diet culture on mental health are tremendous. It's important to think about, like I said earlier, intersections between mental health, body image, and gender roles. We know that Western culture primarily targets women for body shaming and fat stigma. When we talk about intersectionality, we're referring to how different aspects of our identity intersect. And so I already talked a bit about my identity. And so you can think about your identity or your client's identity, but just thinking about if they experience those things, if they experience identities that are typically oppressed or discriminated against, that they will have a larger impact if they're experiencing other oppressions. Fat stigma is just one of those. Body policing contributes to feelings of shame, depression, and anxiety, harmful relationships with food and body, and often disordered eating, body image acceptance issues, self-harm, and suicide. And so this is a really serious thing. So we talk about this damage that's been done by things like healthism and diet culture, and it affects people young and old. 70% of teens define ideal body image as what they see in fashion magazines, but we know that only 5% of women nationally possess that type of body, and 91% of women are unhappy with their bodies and diet to achieve their body type, of their ideal body type. And you think about that, if 91% of mothers are dieting, what is that teaching our children? It's a $650 billion industry, and when you think about that, it takes it away from us focusing on the things that matter. We're focusing on spending money on weight loss and diets, and it takes away and it reinforces things that are unhealthy societal norms. It has become the status quo to talk about diet and diet talk in this manner. Children and youth are greatly influenced by the way that people talk about their diet, and media and about dieting and bodies is constantly going on. So when we talk about that dieting thing, if parents are eating different meals than their children because they're dieting, what does that teach them? They discuss things like calories, like, oh, I shouldn't have this cake because it's got too many calories. And so the kids hear that, and then they think about that, right? One time I was working with, we were working at our eating disorder center, and we heard that a couple nurses talking about their muffin top and how they just needed to lose a little weight. Meanwhile, at this, it's not a center for eating disorders, but we provide care to youth with eating disorders there. And they're there waiting in the waiting room. So we have to be mindful of how we talk about food and bodies, even when we don't think that clients are around. So these are just some statistics. Some of them are a little bit dated, but just to look at for the prevalence. So we know that 1.5% of Canadian women aged 15 to 24 had an eating disorder, and this is again probably underreported. The prevalence rate is quite low. However, it's really important because, first of all, the prevalence rates appear to increase during the transition between adolescence and adulthood. So if we don't treat these youth at that time, then they're likely to develop even more problems into young adulthood. And as you can see, it starts as early as 5 to 12. But the other thing is that eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of all mental health conditions. So this is a really serious problem. Bullying and body image, of course, this is a factor that's impacting our clients. And so at least 1 in 3 adolescent students have reported being bullying, while 47% of parents have reported their children have been victims of bullying. And again, this is statistics, so we know that it's not necessarily 100% accurate. It may likely be higher than that. And then we look at the rate of discrimination of people who identify in the LGBTQ community. It's 3 times higher for them to have discrimination against them than heterosexual youth, and girls are more likely to be bullied than boys on the internet. And this shows that fat phobia is internalized in early life, and bodies are policed at a young age, which often leads to mental health concerns. This is just not all bullying is body image based, but we know that a lot of it is. I often have clients telling me about how somebody called them fat at school and how they decided not to eat their lunch that day. And these aren't people with eating disorders. These are just people who are living in a culture that teaches them that fat is bad. And fat isn't bad. Fat is a descriptor. So we need to change the way we use language. So here's another bit of statistics here. Children who appear over or underweight are at higher risk of being bullied, higher anxiety levels, levels of low self-esteem, depression, other mental health concerns, and of course we talked about disordered eating. So if we skip into more now body neutrality and why it's important. Well, we already talked about this halfway point and why it's important, but it's specifically helpful for those who've experienced body dysphoria. So people with gender identity conflicts, right? It's not necessarily easy for them to have body positivity or love their body all the time because they don't feel like necessarily that their parts match their gender, and so that can be part of it. Those with eating disorders who have body dysmorphia, and so that's hard for them to get to a place where they necessarily love their body. Again, focusing the shift away from thinking about body all the time to thinking about other things that matter. Those with illness, injury, or physical limitations. So it's often viewed as a size-specific term that neglects people, body positivity is, that neglects people with disabilities, those who identify as genderqueer, non-binary, trans, people of color, and those who are Indigenous. And it just says it's okay if it's hard to love your body, and searching for total self-love 100% of the time can lead to feeling like failure, that perfectionism thing. So so that's one part. And then, it erases shame. It's more inclusive, and it celebrates health at every size, which is what we really focus on. And it just allows people to feel more safe in their body. And so then we look at, instead of talking about diets don't work. Instead of talking about body weight and size equaling health, we know that that's not true. So you can't judge a person based on their body shape and size and think that what their health is. Fat doesn't kill, but fat stigma does. So, talk about suicide, self-harm, if people are feeling depressed because they feel like their body is never going to be what it does. So this is just an important thing to think about in terms of how we talk about bodies. Health at every size is a principle that I work within, as well as some of my colleagues and the people at Nourish, and it is a way to promote wage-neutral care. So I would encourage you to read up on this if you're interested. So health at every size is the practice of health rather than body weight or size. It is based on evidence. Health behaviors are more accurate and potentially modifiable predictor of health. So instead of saying, oh, someone is a certain BMI, they're unhealthy, we know that actually health behaviors are what predict health. And those things that we talked about in the food for thought pyramid, those are the things that predict health. Weight loss programs, again, I said, have an extremely low success rate, and weight stigma has an extremely negative impact on physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And so those are just some things that to think about. It is based on the principles of critical awareness and self-compassion, celebrating body diversity, honoring size, age, race, gender, ethnicity, disability, orientation. It's about learning to find joy in moving your body and being physically active in those ways instead of forcing your body and using exercise as punishment or exercising as you have to do. It's doing exercise that you want to do. It's finding joyful movement in that way. It's about learning to get back to that place of trusting your internal hunger cues, eating to your appetite and satiety. It's respecting social conditions that frame eating options. So what I mean by that is if you want to have cake at a birthday party, that's okay. So some ways to promote body neutrality in your work. while learning about health at every size and weight neutral approaches to health is really important. And it helps because then you can, if you know this language, then you can use the language in your work without even labeling it. But you can also use that when you notice that people, maybe parents that you're working with or youth that you're working with, and provide them some information and education on the facts. Really stopping diet talk and countering those narratives with weight neutral or health at every size type approaches and messages. Stopping body policing. So stop policing your body, stop policing other bodies, stop policing your food intake and other people's, that kind of thing. And so it's just something that is important. Like this one, posting body positive messages in your office space, or sharing them on your Facebook, or any way that your clients may access using images in your presentations or things like that. And then this whole piece around teach clients about self-compassion, teach clients about mindfulness and joyful movements instead of teaching them about exercise that's prescribed. Instead of saying to them, well, we know that the research says that you'll have less depression if you exercise X amount of minutes per day. So I'd recommend you get on the treadmill. Well, if the kid hates the treadmill, that's probably not going to help them. So helping them to find something that they enjoy, and if that's not your area you're comfortable with, then referring them on to somebody who can support them with that. And so as clinicians, we're not immune to diet culture or body policing, but by incorporating health at every size and body neutral approach to care, we can support children and youth in learning different ways to think about food and bodies. We can also provide education and support to parents and children. And these are just some images that I like from Nourish. And so on the left, this is what we want to talk about when we talk about body neutral space. All bodies are good bodies. Your body, your rules. You're allowed to love yourself exactly as you are right now. Your size and anyone else's does not dictate their health or their worth. Be gentle with yourself and be kind to you as you are to others. That's a self-compassion